Good morning. It's Tuesday. Mercury is now in its retrograde shadow. And today I am going to talk about what Mercury retrograde is and what Mercury retrograde isn't. Because there are a lot of pop culture misunderstandings, perpetuated fantasies, and things around Mercury retrograde, which, second to sun sign astrology, is likely the most accessible gateway to astrology for most people. So I just want to talk about what Mercury retrograde is and what Mercury retrograde isn't. We're going to talk about the anatomy of a Mercury retrograde and what is actually happening, right? So let's first off start talking about what Mercury is, because we can't really define a Mercury retrograde unless we know what Mercury is and what it does and how it moves on a regular basis. So Mercury is the closest to the king, right? The closest to the king is the messenger, right? This is the person who is responsible for articulating, passing on the messages of the king. Kind of an executor in a kind of way. So they always say, don't shoot the messenger, because the messenger is not the one who has made the decision. The messenger is the person who is responsible for articulating the decision. Mercury is both the translator and interpreter. To translate means to take something from one medium and find the correspondences of that something in another medium. So if we are translating language, we are taking words, concepts, ideas, language, and in one medium, I will say I love you, which is a language of English. In another medium, I would say je t'aime, right? Or j'adore in French, which is another medium. So the translator takes an idea from one language and puts it in the medium of another language. An interpreter takes the meaning of something, the intention of something in one medium, and then puts it in another medium, right? So sometimes when we are translating, we find that there is not an equal or direct correspondence for a thing in two mediums. So the interpreter's job is to find the best correspondence. Sometimes there isn't one. That's why we say lost in translation, okay? The interpretation and what's the other word I'm looking for? The interpretation and the translation of Mercury is this way. So that's vertical, and it's this way, right? So this way is bifold. It's two ways. This way is from the mind to the mouth, from the concepts born in the mind to the words that we use. So even we think in language, right? But there's still a translation of our thoughts into words, into language. But also there is the vertical sense of a divine translation, right? So in every spiritual culture every spiritual tradition, religion there is some concept or deity that relates to this idea of a translator. And this is really teaching us about the nature of Mercury in Western astrology, but we see it in other cultures as well, where there is someone or something who is so adaptable and changeable that they can function in two different planes and worlds or more. Right? So if we think about the messenger of the king, he has full access to the royal court, but he also can move amongst the commoners. He can go to the battlefield. He can go to the church, right? So when we talk about Mercury as being on the divine plane, the earthly plane, and the deathly plane, in every spiritual tradition, there is someone or something that is ushering souls into the afterlife, right? Because this being, this deity, this entity can go to the afterlife without dying. It's the only one in that tradition, right? So I'm not sure if in the Yoruba, Ifa, Lukumi tradition it's Elegba or Igun. I always get those mixed up, but somebody can correct me, right? That this is the Orisha who can usher souls to the afterlife, but also they govern pathways and open doors, right? So Mercury, even in our culture, even in the Western tradition of astrology, even in sidereal astrology, speaks to us about the facility and dexterity and adeptness of being able to go back and forth between mediums, being able to operate on the divine plane, the earthly plane, and the non-earthly plane, or the underworld afterlife. Even in Christianity, right? We say Virgo is the virgin, but this is really not about sexuality. This is not about virginity in the modern sense, right? When we talk about Virgo and the Virgin and Mary, and even this tradition that is not necessarily rooted in Christianity, but that even in Kemetic stories and interpretations of divinity and how it's come to earth, this concept exists of that the woman's womb, the womb of the mother, is the place where divinity comes through to embody. Right? So again, this bringing the divine down into the earthly plane and then experiencing death, right? This is what we talk about when we talk about the story of Jesus and Mary and the Immaculate Conception, but really being able to make real and material the divine. So Mercury for me is the most underrated planet, right? Mercury is the most underrated planet. I mean, when we talk about the language of the divine and using words to embody the divine, to articulate something that's coming from another plane, whether that's our mind or the spiritual realm, we're talking about Mercury. If we're talking about magic and ritual and ceremony, the incantation of language on a daily basis. If you saw my tweet, I was talking to my son the other day because he got into a little something with some kid and told him some things that wasn't really right. And he was very ashamed and very upset. But one of the things that I told him, and this is totally related to Mercury, is that words are magic. Words have the power to change how somebody feels on the inside, right? This is Mercury. If you use the tarot, there are some correspondences between the card, the Magician, and Mercury. And if you look at the Magician card in the Rider Waite Coleman Smith, you got to add that Coleman Smith because that's the black woman who did the artwork, right? So if you look at the artwork on the Rider Waite Coleman Smith version of the Magician card, you'll see the Magician is there with tools from all four suits. He has wands, he has a cup for cups, he has a pentacle for pentacles, and he has a sword for swords, all laid out on his table, and he's with this garb on, right? So again, Mercury as the Magician is talking about the facility with which we can move from one medium to another, the dexterity of being able to master a variety of different mediums, not for the sake of becoming a thing, but being able to move through things. So people who have Mercury prominent in their chart are often people who do more than one thing, who have a prominence or facility with language, who may be able to speak more than one language, but also a person who is able to master multiple mediums, right? So what does Mercury do, right? Mercury is never more than, I want to say 28 degrees. I'm not sure if I have that number right. Forgive me, 26 or 28 degrees from the sun. So that means Mercury is either in the same sign as the sun or on either side of the sun. So if the sun is in Aquarius right now, it could either be in Pisces, Aquarius, or Capricorn. And where Mercury is in relationship to the sun by sign is telling us something about the phase relationship of the sun with regard to the solar Mercury cycle. Remember, every planet has a cycle with another planet, okay? So when we observe Mercury, Mercury takes anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 weeks to move through a sign. When Mercury is moving its fastest, right? It will zip through a sign in 2 weeks. When Mercury is moving its slowest, say it goes retrograde towards the end of a sign and then stations direct at the beginning, I think it's about 60 days, right? I will, as long as Instagram won't eat my video like it did. But yeah, so Mercury can spend anywhere from 2 weeks to 60 days in a sign. And again, This is the changeable nature of Mercury. Mercury being able to move fast, move slow, whatever the job needs, Mercury's got the tool for it, okay? So one thing to know is that Mercury is not doing anything different in real measurable space. When we say Mercury moves this way or that way, direct or 2 weeks or 60 days in a sign, what we're really saying is that Mercury appears to change speed and direction from Earth. And if you have my ebook on the houses, you know that in astrology, visibility and appearance is everything, right? Whether or not you can see something and how something appears and how it appears in relationship to other things. This is where we get the significance and meaning of astrology and of the planets. So if Mercury is at its fastest, moving at about 2 weeks, what happens at the retrograde is that Mercury has been moving its fast, and it's been moving so fast that it has overtaken the sun and sped past the sun and is way ahead of the sun, okay? So with Mercury being way ahead of the sun, now Mercury appears to slow down, right? Mercury appears to slow down, and now Mercury is going to appear to stop. This is what happens when a planet stations retrograde. It has moved the furthest ahead it can go in the zodiac, away from whatever reference point. For Mercury, the reference point is its distance from the sun. So Mercury has moved as far as ahead as it can away from the sun. It is like, whoa, right? Because Mercury is really tethered to the sun. Language, articulation, tools, translation, interpretation is tethered to the mind, to the intellect and perception. Okay? So these two bodies are really interrelated and connected, and you cannot disconnect them from each other. Okay? So then Mercury will slow down, appear to stop, and then it will appear to move backwards. And in that appearing to move backwards, now it will meet up with the sun again. And we call this the inferior conjunction, where the sun overtakes Mercury, and it'll keep moving backwards until it gets as far behind the sun as it can get. And it says, whoa, stop, pause, and it will appear to stop and move forward again. And this is called the direct station. So at this point today, what is happening is that Mercury is entering what we call its retrograde shadow. And that's just a fancy word for saying Mercury is going to stay within a certain range of the zodiac over the next 6 weeks. And that certain range of the zodiac we call its shadow. The endpoints of that range are marked by where Mercury is going to station direct at the end of its retrograde travel. Retrograde just means to move backwards. So that point is at 21 degrees Aquarius. That's where Mercury is today. And Mercury's, the front end, or the furthest point at the other end of the zodiac of the retrograde shadow, is where Mercury is going to station direct. And I believe that's on March 6th. And that is at 5 degrees Pisces. So Mercury will stay within 21 degrees Aquarius and 5 degrees Pisces. That's about, what, 15, 14 degrees for the next month or two, right? So what we watch with the shadow is the moment that Mercury crosses into that range, and then the moment that Mercury crosses out of that range. So sometime in March, late March, Mercury is going to, after having stationed direct at 21 degrees Aquarius, it is going to move forward again and pass up that 5 degrees of Pisces. So now, if you know anything about how I understand and practice astrology, you know that when we observe planets transiting signs, we are really observing a particular area of our life being activated in a particular way. So for this retrograde, what I want you to be thinking about is December of 2018. In December of 2018, Mars was in Aquarius after having been in Capricorn for most of 2018, from May until November of 2018. So in December, though, Mars would have crossed into that 21 degrees of Aquarius through the beginning of January, it would have crossed over that 5 degrees of Pisces. But before that, and I'm going to put the date in the either in a story on here or on the YouTube description of this video when I upload it, because one of the primary features of this retrograde is Mercury squaring Jupiter 3 times, and it's reactivating and progressing the square that Mars would have made with Jupiter while it was in Aquarius back in November and December. So I have a lot of tweets on that, and I'm going to re-up those tweets. So if you don't follow me on Twitter, you really want to read those, because that Aquarius Jupiter square, Aquarius Scorpio square is really important to this. Okay, so let's go back. So we're talking about the retrograde shadow and the portion of the zodiac that Mercury will go forward over, backwards over, and forward again until it leaves that shadow. And what I want you to think about and how I want you to understand the shadow is this shadow is basically a segment of time. And whatever happens within the segment of time that Mercury first goes over that portion of the zodiac that it's going to revisit, this is establishing a narrative or story in your chart. And the narrative or story that's being established in the time frame of Mercury first traveling over its shadow, right, is the story that we will follow through the retrograde. Think of it as Mercury crosses over into that shadow, 21 degrees Aquarius today, and let's just say, for the sake of an example, you have a conversation, you get a piece of mail, you get a piece of news or information, or you begin something, right? And so during this retrograde period, you might be revisiting this thing, you might be having a conversation about this thing, right? I want to give you guys some of the keywords that I use in the 2019 Sidereal Astrology Guide, the fill in the blanks that I use to help you interpret and understand this retrograde. This retrograde begins in Aquarius, this retrograde, as I've explained, begins in Pisces with the retrograde station at 5 Pisces on March 6th. And the retrograde portion of this cycle ends, I don't have the date in my mind, it's sometime in March. I want to say like the 24th maybe, with Mercury stationing direct at 21 degrees Aquarius, and Mercury has crossed into that portion of the zodiac today. So we have basically 2 or 3, the direct, let me say retrograde, direct. Okay, right, so we have 3 fill in the blanks, or 3 points of interpretation for this retrograde. The first one is the retrograde station, which again is in a couple weeks, and that is going to be Mercury stationary retrograde in Pisces. So when Mercury stops and appears to stop in the sky, what we're saying is, whoa, stop, pause, go back, and revisit something, right? Revisit a conversation, revisit an agreement or contract, revisit an idea, revisit a problem that requires a solution. Mercury is not happy in Pisces, right? Mercury is not happy in Pisces. I'm making up dates. Don't listen to me. Look at, because I'm just realizing that I'm mixing up the dates. Don't listen to me on the dates. I'll put them up somewhere else. They're already on the graphic on my page, right? On my page, I've got a graphic. I put it up in my story again today. But there's a graphic on my page that has all the dates. Listen, I'm messing myself up and y'all. So anyways, the whole point is that Mercury says stop, go back, and revisit conversations about connecting beyond the personal and the tangible. This is what you need to understand about Pisces. Pisces is a water sign. Water is always about biology. Pisces teaches us about the ways in which our bodies are not only instruments are not just closed circuits of being and feeling, right? Cancer teaches us about the closed circuit of being and feeling in our body. And what I mean by that is that Cancer is the essential fundamental functions of the physical body. The connections between nervous system and stomach and pineal gland and all of these other parts of our body, endocrine system and reproductive system, and all of the things that our body communicates within itself, hunger, sleepiness, feelings like sadness, right? But even feelings are biological and physiological. So Cancer teaches us about, okay, brain speak to stomach, stomach hungry, feed stomach. Now that impulse of hunger moves me to act to meet that need. That's Cancer. But Pisces teaches us that our bodies are not only subject to its own needs and the sentiments that arise from within, but that our bodies are also instruments that teach us about our world around us and the connections that we have with other people. So that a feeling in my stomach may not be hunger. A feeling in my stomach may be in response to someone or something happening in the world around me. And Pisces teaches us that the feelings we experience in our body are not just personal and tangible. This is why we might get some significations for Pisces, like being empathetic or being psychic. But what we're really saying is that our bodies are porous and permeable, and that our bodies speak to us not only about needs and survival, but they speak to us about what we're encountering in the world, and our bodies are changed by the people and things that we encounter in the world. This is a very, very, very uncomfortable place for Mercury, because Mercury, where it's at home in Gemini and exalted and at home in Virgo, is talking about how we can articulate something and put word or symbol to it. And it's talking about how we can calculate, organize, and classify, right? How we can be precise, right? So that if you have Virgo, it's not about perfection, it's about precision. Precision is, how can I calculate this thing? How can I find out how much I have? How can I measure, right? What is the method I'm going to use in this? What is the method I'm going to use in this process? I need to process and calculate the process and the outcome. And so Mercury in Pisces is what we call in its fall and detriment. That means that Mercury is stripped of all authority in Pisces. To be stripped of authority, for a planet to be stripped of authority, that's a planet in its fall or detriment. So that could be Moon in Scorpio, or that could be Sun in Aquarius, or it could be Venus in Scorpio or Aries, right? For a planet to be in the sign of its fall and stripped of its authority means that that planet no longer functions as a means to its own end, right? It means that Mercury is not functioning as, it cannot use words to articulate. It cannot use numbers to measure and count, right? Because that's Mercury in its own sign. Mercury in Gemini means I'm using words to communicate. I'm using words to translate. I'm using words and symbols to articulate, right? Mercury in Virgo is saying I'm using numbers to calculate. I'm using systems of organization and classification to measure. But in Pisces, Mercury says, wait, I'm using my intuition and the symbols of my body to articulate and communicate. How does that work, right? What Mercury in Pisces teaches us is that the meaning that is implied and contained within any moment or idea often is limited and never fully embodied by the symbols, words, and numbers that we use to articulate it. I'm going to say that again. Mercury in Pisces teaches us that the words, Mercury in Pisces teaches us that the words and symbols we use to talk and speak and think and communicate one idea to another, to translate one medium to another, to classify, organize, and measure, those words and symbols often suck the life out of the meaning and intention of the very thing we're trying to articulate. I'm going to give you an example of this. I am working on a show here where I have to, I'm rearranging some songs and composing some music, but I have to like write these charts out, right? And so the charts are just me using the consensus of symbols that musicians use to communicate to each other about what we're going to play. And so I was writing, I was trying to write down this blues. Now, you know, the blues tradition is, as with many traditions of music, are not written, right? They're very feeling based. And so I'm trying to write this out, this rhythmic figure. Oh, thanks. I'm trying to write out this rhythmic figure to articulate like this da 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 da. And in my mind, I'm like, man, do I want to write that as a triplet figure, or do I want to write that as like a dotted 8th note and a 16th note, right? But in that moment, and this is relating to Mercury and Pisces, in that moment, I had this revelation that like these notes on this page are just an approximation of what will actually be played. And I can give as much instruction, right? And I can be as precise, very Virgo, right? Because I want to use the symbols so that people know how long to hold a note and which note to play, but understanding that even these notes on this page are merely an approximation of the intention that I have for the sound that I want to be created. So if we're living this in real life, we're understanding that words that we use to communicate with people are just an approximation of the meaning and intention that we have, right? Words are an approximation for what we really mean. Right? Because at the end of the day, I can say I'm hungry, right? And you can know that that means that I probably want some food, but there's still something there that's lost in translation. I cannot make you feel my hunger. I can only tell you about it. And maybe you'll understand and maybe you won't. That applies to so many things. I can use words to tell you something, right? But at the same time, my words, thanks Miles, I can use my words to tell you something like how I feel. But at the same time, those words will never make you feel what I feel. They will never make you feel what I feel. So this is what we're dealing with Mercury and Pisces. Stop, right? When Mercury stations retrograde, we're saying stop, pause, go back, and revisit conversations that help you to connect beyond the personal and the tangible. So how are you using your words to embody these things that are unembodiable, if that's the word, right? So Mercury is going to station direct in Aquarius, and we'll revisit these on the actual day that they happen, but Mercury is going to station direct in the Aquarius, and when Mercury stations direct, we're saying stop, move forward, and resolve, right? So the direct is stop, move forward, and resolve, because see, you've already gone back and revisited, so now you got to go back and resolve because you're going over that portion of the zodiac for the 3rd time. The first time begins today, and we are having conversations about personal sovereignty and self-determination. On my Twitter account yesterday was Audre Lorde's birthday, and there was a lot of pieces and essays going around about her life and some of her words, and I read this one piece on brain pickings or something like that, and I reposted it because this was truly the embodiment of Mercury in Aquarius. It was talking about how she was talking about how the role of silence and how she was reckoning with the moments in her life where she was silent and that she didn't speak up. And in all of these quotes, every single time that she was talking about this silence and how she could have spoken and said these things in this moment, she would say, here I am, a black woman, a lesbian, right? Naming herself and calling herself who she was, so you would have no confusion about the reference point for her truth and for the words that she's speaking in that moment. And so Mercury in Aquarius teaches us about using words to self-determine, to have sovereignty over who we are, right? Mercury in Aquarius says, I name myself and you call me what I tell you that I am. You don't call me what you designate me. So this has a lot of implications for people who are trans and queer and gender non-binary, because they get to say who they are. This has a lot of implications for Black people, because Black people get to say who they are. The entire Black Power movement can be embodied in that James Brown song, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Because what they've done in that moment, what he did in that moment, is that he took something that was meant to be a weapon to oppress him and took ownership and claimed it. So you see women doing this with the word bitch and slut, right? They are reclaiming that language and saying that, no, I get to say what a bitch is. I get to say what being Black is. I get to say what being a woman is. I get to say what being queer is. I get to say what being straight is. I get to say what being a man is. I get to say what being a boy is. This is how we are reclaiming language as a means to personal sovereignty and self-determination. So in your own life, over this next few weeks before Mercury crosses into Pisces, where it's going to station retrograde, we are having conversations and thinking about how we can reclaim language around who and what we are and what certain things in our life is. Really quickly, I'm going to go around the zodiac for each rising sign and moon sign in the sidereal zodiac and tell you where this Mercury and Aquarius thing is happening, and then I got to go. All right. Number 1, For Aquarius rising, this is for sidereal. It does not work for tropical. If you don't know your sidereal chart, you can go to thepeoplesoracle.com. At the top or in the menu bar, you're going to click sidereal birth chart and follow those precise instructions to cast your sidereal birth chart so you can find out what your rising and moon sign is, and then you can come back to this video on my live or YouTube and then see what I'm talking about. Okay, so for Aquarius rising, this is in your first house. Your first house is you, your physical body, actions you take, and things that happen to you. So for Aquarius rising, this is very personal, right? You are coming to embody yourself in a way that gives you agency over how people see you, and you can use words to do that. So for Aquarius rising, we would say thinking about having conversations about how I use language to claim sovereignty and self-determination in my life over my body and over who I am. If you are Pisces rising, this is happening in your 12th house. The 12th house is a place of solitude. This is a place of unfamiliar. And so for Pisces, this is unfamiliar because Pisces is permeable. Pisces is so used to taking on the shape of and kind of becoming the shape of wherever they are. Their bodies are so sensitive and they're always feeling inside of them. Their physical bodies are changing in relationship to their relations, in relationship to their physical environment. And so for them, the idea that they can self-determine is contrary to how they experience themselves in their bodies. So for for Pisces rising, Mercury in Aquarius is talking to you about how uncomfortable it is for you to claim personal sovereignty and self-determination because it takes you outside of your body and how you naturally interface with the world. Okay, we're going to go to Aries rising. This is your 11th house. For your 11th house, this is making connections that bolster your personal power and agency. That's what you're all about, right? I do it because I can. That's what Aries says. I have the physical strength and courage of will to do this thing, and so I will. And so planets transiting through your 11th house of Aquarius, and especially Mercury in Aquarius, is really having these deep conversations in your community. Aries rising can really be an activist and a rebel. My perfect example of Aries rising, who has I want to say both Moon and Venus in Aquarius, is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Can we talk about somebody who embodies the I am doing this because I can? I don't care what the law says. This is the right that I have, and I'm going to act on it, and I dare you to stop me. And then to have that Aquarius in the 11th house, Dr. Martin Luther King talking to us about personal sovereignty and Black self-determination. Oh my God, right? If you need to understand what Aquarius is, just go look at this man with his Moon and Venus in Aquarius in the 11th house. So yeah, activist Aries, what you doing out there? All right. What's next? Taurus, this is your 10th house, right? So this is your superiors and your bosses. And this can be uncomfortable because Taurus, much like Pisces, is very much so used to conforming, adapting, and assimilating. Not necessarily because Taurus is a pushover, but Taurus understands that how you appear, how you dress, may not necessarily be who you are. It may not be authentic to you. Taurus understands that we have social designations and there are expectations of us that if we deviate from, we are shamed. And so Taurus often chooses the easy way rather than being shamed, but they also have the special skill of being able to meet people where they are in a social sense. Some people might say that that's being fake or phony, but we all wear masks in the sense of who I am and how I really feel in this moment. I'm not really acting that way. We wear a mask when we're hungry and we don't act hungry. We wear a mask when we're angry and we don't behave or use words that are angry. So for Taurus, in your 10th house, you're dealing with your superiors and your bosses, people who have authority over you. You're dealing with your own propensity for eminence and prominence and visibility out in the world. And so how are you claiming self-determination in your interactions with your authorities, right? How are you empowered by authority figures in your life to claim who and what you are in a very public way? Or how are you claiming who and what you are in a very public way in general? Gemini rising, this is your 9th house. So this is going to be all of the gatekeepers, colleges and university, publishing, religious and spiritual institutions and organizations, and travel. So this could mean you're taking a trip, a foreign trip, or you're making plans for taking a trip. This can also mean that you are doing something in college or university. Maybe you are ready to claim your major and decide what it is that you're going to study. Maybe you are having a kind of spiritual breakthrough where you are being self-determined in how you choose to interact with religious and spiritual organizations and doctrines. Cancer rising, this is your 8th house of death, other people's money, inheritances, loans, debts. So if you are needing to get a loan, if you are dealing with some debt, this can mean something significant for your taxes, right? So maybe you didn't get back the money that you thought you were going to get on your tax return, or maybe some issue comes up with filing your taxes. All of those things are definitely possible. This is not comprehensive. I'm just giving you a piece of what could be. If you have the 2019 Sidereal Astrology Guide, you already know what your Aquarius house is, and you can go look at the table of significations, which is a little bit more complete than what I'm able to give here in this time. If you don't have the 2019 Sidereal Astrology Guide and you're waiting on me to ship it, I went to the printer today to harass them and made him come out to my car, and he told me that tomorrow I'll have them. So that means I'll ship them by the end of this week. If you don't have one that you're waiting on, you can download it on my website, and you can have all of the fill in the blanks and write them down personally for your chart. Okay, where are we at? Leo rising. This is your 7th house. Oh boy, Leo rising. Yeah, you could be dealing with contracts and agreements, adversaries and enemies. You could be bickering with someone. This can really mean someone or something is challenging your ability to claim authority in your own life. But this can also mean that within relationships, you are taking time and space to determine what relationships look like for you and what's the pushback that you might receive from yourself because it's contrary to how you usually show up, or from your partners because they have an expectation to be and show up a certain way in relationships. Virgo rising, this is your 6th house of work, job duties, employment. So you could be working on a project that has a glitch. If you are looking for work or applying for work, this can be a time where you are applying and interviewing and you're trying to figure out which job that you're going to get. An old opportunity or person that you may have encountered maybe back during Mars in Aquarius. Maybe they might contact you and you have an opportunity to revisit that job opportunity. There could just be glitches in work and all of those things that that come up during the retrograde. Where are we at? Libra rising, this is your 5th house of love, sex, pleasure, and creativity. Children, all of your progeny, biological, intellectual, and creative. Again, project-oriented stuff that you might be working on, but also just thinking about the implications of being able to claim some kind of self-determination in your creative work and dealing with your children. Almost done here. We are at Scorpio rising. This is your 4th house. Sorry if your house gets jacked up or you got some issues going on in your home or family, because this is a really sticky transit for things breaking or going into disrepair in your home. You might be traveling to home and dealing with some issues at home, but always refer back to that thing about self-determination and personal sovereignty and using language and articulating and having conversations in that regard. Where are we now? We are at, what's the fire sign next? Sagittarius rising. This is your 3rd house of the familiar, near relatives, family, relationships. How are you using language and having conversations to determine what family is, right? What is your familiar? How are you making moves and possibly traveling? How are you using social media and in the connections and relationships that you make via social media to be self-determination, claiming your space, staking out your territory about who and what you are in this public sphere? Again, this is another opportunity for travel. If you're Pisces rising, you could be traveling too. I forgot to mention that, to some place unfamiliar, far away, or by yourself. But yeah, Sagittarius rising, this is another opportunity for travel. So that's always possible. Where are we at? Capricorn rising, this is your 2nd house, last one. Your 2nd house, this is your money and earned income. You could have a similar thing with the taxes thing going on that Cancer rising has. This, again, similar to Virgo rising, is a transit that might bring a new job or project, or you might find yourself having an unexpected expense. that comes up and resolves during this retrograde, or a thing that you thought you had to spend money on, you don't, or a thing that you thought you didn't have to spend money on, you do. All of contracts that have financial implications for your income and expenses, making major purchases. I would say for Capricorn rising, this is the one last thing I wanted to say. Mercury retrograde does not mean don't buy things. It does not mean don't repair things. It means that if you have something that needs to be repaired, repair it and fix it. If you have something that you need to purchase, you need to be due diligence, and you need to be thinking about, do I want to purchase this during the shadow, or do I want to wait till Mercury stations retrograde to make this purchase? So use this time to do your research if it's a major purchase. But if you are pressed to purchase something or sign something during the retrograde, do not fret. Oftentimes during another retrograde, the contract that you signed will be renegotiated or revisited. So don't feel like you're scary and you can't do things. All it means is that you're going to revisit it at some point. So you can be intentional about revisiting that thing, i.e. making a purchase, and then you decide that I want to use this time to research my purchase and then I'll make the purchase later. Or just knowing if you're forced into making a purchase that you likely will have to revisit that, and you might take that into consideration while you make your purchase. That's all I have to say about today. I hope you have a happy Tuesday. We also have a full moon today, so I'm going to talk about that on Twitter, and I'll probably post something here on my profile page. And yeah, for those of you again who are waiting for the calendars, I'm sorry, my printer is just not my old printer who just delivered it when they said it would be done. Sorry. So I will be sending those out by the end of the week. I'm going to try for Thursday. We'll see. You guys have a great Tuesday. And if you want to watch this later, it'll be up here, and it will be on my YouTube channel where all of my other live videos are. Y'all have a great day. Bye.